So a couple years ago, I took my family over to London. We spent a month in that beautiful city and we hit all the tourist traps. Went to the palace, checked out the castles, got to see Big Ben. And being typical tourists, of course, we took the train down to Paris, spent a week there checking out all the sites, including the Louvre. But a few days before we were scheduled to leave, I met up with a number of American friends. And it was at that meetup that I realized, damn, us Americans, we don't have any style. Now, it's not like we look like bums. Well, maybe one of the guys looked homeless. But seriously, a lot of the Europeans I had seen on my trip knew how to dress. I mean, a lot of these guys, man, they had style. They had panache. While us Americans in Europe, well, we're at least easy to spot in our cargo shorts, sandals, t-shirts, and baseball caps. So what's going on here? The United States is one of the richest countries in the world per capita. I know, inflation doesn't make it seem like that. The point being, Americans can afford nice clothing. We also have some of the most stylish and iconic cities in the world. Seriously, the New York fashion scene is top tier. So why do American men care so little about their looks? Maybe Americans don't have the confidence. No, that can't be the case. And that's because us Americans are constantly rated as some of the most confident people on the planet, despite the fact that we don't know what we're talking about half the time. No, the real reason that Americans aren't stylish has more to do with history than it has to do with education or economics. Although those other two do play a factor, and I know this because I did the research. So why are Americans not stylish? And why is this a great thing for us as a country? And most importantly, how can you use this to your advantage? So this first point is all about history, and it's hard for Americans to even see it unless they've traveled outside the country and they are well read on the histories of India, on Europe, on China. Because anyone that's familiar with those countries know that they have a long storied history that goes back thousands of years. The US, on the other hand, we get excited when we see a building that's been around for 100 years. Seriously, we preserve them as historical. Guys over in Europe are like, my apartment complex, this thing is 500 years old. But seriously, the United States is an experiment. It's a country that was founded on the ideal that all men are created equal. Now, of course, it has been imperfectly implemented over the years and they keep trying to improve it. But in general, if you talk to the average American, a young kid, and you ask him, hey, could you become president someday? Well, most of these kids would say, yeah, I could be president, but I'd rather be a YouTuber. Which is absurd because being a YouTuber is not that great. But seriously, here in the United States, it's a pretty common belief that you can achieve anything. I would say in many other parts of the world, that is less ingrained in people. Now, you could argue all day whether or not it's true, but it's safe to say very few young people in most countries around the world think that they can achieve the highest level of office. So how does this relate to fashion and style and why American men don't dress well? Because American men grow up in what they believe to be a classless society. Compare that to India, where I know the caste system has been abolished, but still you have people that look down on others. And there are people that remember it. And if you go to some rural areas, you will still see a little bit of it. Let's go to the UK. Yes, I know the aristocracy doesn't have the power it used to, but still it exists. Kids don't grow up thinking that they could become the king. No, you have to be born the king. Over in France, they cut off a lot of heads in that revolution to try to equalize things, but there are still classes. In China, there's a huge divide between those that live in urban centers and those that live in the country. In fact, it's very difficult for those that come from a rural background to actually get and break into the class system that they have in some of the cities. Now, as anyone that has studied class structure, as anyone that understands history knows, how do human beings tell if somebody is of one class or another? Based on their clothing, based on their presentation, based on their mannerisms. These things are a quick shortcut that a merchant can tell, hey, I need to give that person my full attention. I better not cross them because they come from a higher level than me and they could do damage, not only to me and my reputation, but they could put my shop, in the gutter. In the United States, that type of class system has never existed. In fact, the founders of this country absolutely hated the class systems they came from. So countries that have a history of the division of the classes between people, clothing was much more important to be able to tell who is someone of importance, or you could fake it. You could look like someone of importance and be treated better. Now, in the United States, of course, we do have socioeconomic classes, and you could argue whether or not they're breaking up, whether or not the middle class is disappearing. But in general, we do have this perception of when someone dresses better, that they are a step up in status, which is the next point I want to get to. So let's talk about status. And I have to say that this word, for a lot of people, it leaves a bad taste in their mouth. They don't like the idea that you would wear a fancy watch or you would dress in a way to be able to send a signal of status. No, again, for a lot of Americans, I should be measured on my ability. I should be measured on what I'm able to bring to the table. I shouldn't be measured basically on who I am and, what school I went to. The reality is we're human beings and we use status as a shortcut to quickly tell whether or not we will trust somebody. Don't believe me? Walk into a bank. What do you see? It's built in a sturdy building. It gives you the idea of the status that they are there to stay. You walk into a lawyer's office. What does he have on the walls in his office? The certificates of the school he went to, especially if he went to an Ivy League school or a fancy school, a great state school, University of Texas. He went to Harvard. Wherever he went, it's going to be right there so that you can see it, so that you will trust his judgment. And so he can justify charging you $1,000 an hour. So what does all this have to do with clothing? Why Americans don't dress well? And why is this actually great for us as a country? Because in many parts of the world, your clothing is your status symbol. It's the first thing people see before you even open your mouth, and they make a decision about you whether or not you can be trusted. Case in point, the doctor's white coat. Now, historically, this makes sense because there weren't a lot of places that people could actually put their money. They would put it into their homes. They would put it into their clothing. They would put it into the jewelry that they would wear. But that was, you wanted it close to you. Otherwise, it could be stolen. Well, fortunately for the United States, and by the way, the rest of the world is catching up on this, we have had many ways, especially since World War II, to actually put our economic wealth and strength outside of jewelry, outside of physical investments like properties, which are hard, aren't as liquid. To be specific, I'm talking about investments, specifically the stock market. Now, for anyone that lives in a country that's gone through hyperinflation, you know what I'm talking about. I actually have family members over in Ukraine that keep money in their $100 bills that are physically underneath the bed. Okay, not under the bed, but they do hide them in places. The reality is many people living in countries without investment opportunities have to take that money and hope it either doesn't lose value or invest in something that is going to do a better job of retaining the value. And yes, of course, there's real estate, but usually you have to have a big amount of money in that case. So areas like personal presentation, clothing, jewelry are often maxed out because they're lower ticket. Most Americans, they don't have this issue. They can take $100, go on E-Trade and invest it in the stock market, which is basically the US economy. And because of that, because American men have better investment opportunities than clothing, than jewelry, well, they just spend less on it than their counterparts in economies that are less stable. In summary, American men don't have to express status with clothing because any excess funds, no matter how small, can actually be invested into a better economic opportunity. Now, at this point, you may be wondering, how does my style measure up? What actions do I need to take? If you're a man that wants to take action, you're tired of watching all of these videos and not actually following through, going through and buying the clothing, revamping your wardrobe, improving your image, then you need to check out our course, The Style System. Over the last decade, this has been the internet's go-to professional men's style course in which we teach you exactly what you need to know. The goal of the Style System is to give you the information you need to take action so that you can become your best dressed self. Seriously, gents, you're going to walk into a room and unless I'm present, you're going to be the best dressed guy there. Seriously, I've met men who have gone through my course and they put me to shame at times because, yeah, I dressed down and these guys came in and they owned the room. But seriously, gents, check out the course. It's all about action. It's about you taking the steps to become the man you know yourself to be. Now, this next point as to why American men aren't stylish has to do with something that we just expect as people. And one of the best illustrations of this isn't actually in clothing, but actually is in automobiles. I remember reading about how the German and the Japanese, whenever they were trying to enter the US markets, they would come over and they would study, and they were amazed at how Americans actually drove. It's probably no surprise, and I know I'm doing a big stereotype here, that the Japanese and Germans, they're all about efficiency. They're all about things being designed in a way that's ergonomic. It gets you from point A to point B. A car should handle well. It should be dependable. It should probably get pretty good gas mileage. But comfort, come on, that's going to be pretty low on the list. At least it was for the Japanese and for the European customers. For us Americans, it turns out it was almost at the top of the list. We kind of live in our cars. We want something that reclines back. We want that comfortable seat. We also want a lot of room. We want to be able to spread out. We got those big cars. We want to use the full area. We want those, we don't want those skinny vehicles that are going to be more convenient and easily get around tight corners. I mean, here in the US, we all drive full-size trucks and we're not even hauling anything. Well, guess what? All that comfort, it applies to clothing as well. Now, the reality is formal clothing, especially 30, 40 years ago, was not very comfortable. I mean, I love cotton, I love wool, but unless something is made exactly for your body, and even then you can still get tight spots, it could be, it's not as comfortable, let's say, as a pair of sweats. Well, the clothing manufacturers recognized this. And starting in the 1970s, 1980s, all of a sudden, American clothing manufacturers started designing clothing that had a bit of stretch, that actually was more comfortable. Next thing you know, trends start picking up. We've got casual Fridays popping up everywhere in the 1980s. And out on the West Coast of the United States, they made it their mantra that they wanted to be comfortable when they're working. Stretch fabrics became a thing. Wearing jeans with jackets became a thing. All of this coming out of the United States because of our desire to be able to mix in our casual, comfortable clothing with a little bit of our dressier clothing. Now, by the year 2000, we were in full swing. We see performance clothing popping up everywhere. Initially, the styles were horrendous, and I can see why it gave us a bad reputation. But I'd have to say here in 2023, 2024, things are looking really good. There are so many companies now making stretch performance clothing that actually looks really good. I have to admit, a lot of the trousers I wear, a lot of the clothing I wear is performance clothing because it's just more comfortable and it's starting to look really good. But I can't deny that there was a good 30 to 40 year period that a lot of this clothing was getting sent out to the world, and people are seeing this on television. They're like, oh my gosh, yes, these Americans have no style. All that being said, I'm happy that we're actually taking steps in the other direction, because so much of this performance clothing, at least the stuff I'm picking up, is really, if you know how to piece things together, you can put together some awesome outfits, in, again, my opinion. Now, what about education? Are American men completely oblivious to style? I will say that they don't grow up around it like a lot of the Italians do, or those over in France. It's going to be something with France. You've got a whole section. I mean, the biggest companies coming out of that country are all about style. In fact, when I think of France, I think about a people that want to enjoy life, and that's a big part of their culture. While in the United States, it's all about the hustle. It's all about making yourself, whether it's on the gridiron, whether it's out there in the business world. So yeah, I'd say culturally, style and fashion does not have the same hold as it does in a lot of other countries where even historically, a lot of their economy was based on clothing manufacturing. All right, Jen, so if you enjoyed this video, you are going to love this one. Boom, right here. Oh yeah, go check it out. Click on that video, go explore.